20 years ago, an 18-year-old girl named Megan Fuller vanished without a trace on her way home from a weekend party in the small town of Harrison, Indiana, leaving her family in despair and the entire community in shock. Authorities suspected her ex-boyfriend, who was also the owner of the shop where the party was held, but with no body and very little evidence to pursue, the investigation eventually stalled. Yet for all those years, mothers, former co-workers, and a handful of investigators never gave up hope, believing that somewhere in those dusty files there was still one overlooked detail. Then one day, when the state's cold case unit was reinstated, a female lieutenant uncovered a piece of evidence so tiny it was almost invisible. A detail that would turn the entire case upside down and shock the whole Indiana town in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories about justice finally waking up after years of being forgotten, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Harrison Township, Madison County, Indiana, September 2005. A small Midwestern town. Just as autumn was arriving, the cornfields had gone quiet. The smell of machine oil from Carter Automotive still lingered in the morning mist. That night, a weekend night, the sky was clear and colder than usual. On Main Street, only a few yellow streetlights spilled onto cracked sidewalks. The wooden houses stood silent, and far off you could hear the long wail of a freight train before it disappeared into the dark. Megan Fuller, 18, had just finished a week working at Carter Automotive, the only auto repair shop in town. She attended a small employee party held in the back lot to celebrate a friend's birthday. It was simple: a few cans of beer, homemade cake, and an old radio playing 90s rock. Everyone had known each other since they were kids, and no one thought that night would be the last time they ever saw Megan. Around midnight, as the crowd started thinning out, Megan said she was heading home early because she had to help her mom at the convenience store the next morning. She pulled on her brown jacket, wrapped her scarf, and took the familiar shortcut across the old railroad tracks and past the row of abandoned warehouses, a route that cut almost a mile off the main road. It was the path she always took when she got off work late. Quiet, no streetlights, just the wind blowing through the rusty chain-link fences. A night shift worker at the lumber yard at the far end of the tracks later said that around that same time, in the dim light of the yard, he saw the silhouette of a young woman stop to talk to someone on the other side of the fence. The light was too weak to make out faces. He only saw two figures standing close, then stepping a few feet apart. When he looked again a few minutes later, the patch of concrete out front was empty, except for a lone puddle of light. The night passed with no one noticing anything unusual. The next morning, when the sun was already up over the low rooftops, Megan's mother realized her daughter's room was exactly as it had been before she left for work. The bed still made, phone on the table powered off. No one knew where she was. They called a few of her friends. Everyone said Megan had left the party the night before, alone. By noon, with the dirt road behind the shop still empty, no footprints, no sound of engines, the worry turned to fear. Megan's parents drove the old route, stopping at every turn, calling her name into the silence. The dry cornfields rustled back, but there was no answer. When there was nowhere left to look, they drove home in silence, then picked up the phone and reported to police that their daughter had vanished without a trace. The call reached the Madison County Sheriff's Office at 8:12 a.m. on Sunday, and within an hour, the first two patrol officers were at the Fullers' small house at the end of Maplewood Street. Outside, the fog still hadn't lifted. Damp cold clung to the porch steps. On the kitchen table sat a cold cup of coffee and a photo of Megan. Mr. and Mrs. Fuller, faces drawn from a sleepless night, told everything they could remember. Their daughter left the party at Carter Automotive around midnight and said she'd walk home via the shortcut past the old railroad tracks. When police asked about habits, Linda Fuller was firm. Megan had no history of running away, never stayed out overnight without telling them, had no boyfriend and no debts. Her phone had been off since last night, Texts weren't going through, no activity on her bank account. One officer opened his notebook, started a missing person, Fuller, Megan L. file, and asked for photos, clothing description, and anything she might have carried. Linda handed over a graduation photo and her old school ID. Mr. Fuller pulled a pair of the same Converse sneakers his daughter wore from the closet for comparison. Police noted brown leather jacket, light jeans, gray wool scarf, white Converse sneakers, silver bracelet engraved MF. They asked about her route, who was at the party, and any vehicles that regularly used the railroad area. When the interview was done, patrol units were sent out that same morning along the route from Carter Automotive to the East Side neighborhood. The shortcut Megan took was just a narrow dirt path with tall weeds on both sides and rusted metal fencing no one had trimmed in years. The ground still showed old tire tracks. In a few spots fresh grass was flattened, dry leaves mixed with shallow shoe prints, but they were faint and overlapping, impossible to date. In the initial report sent to the Madison County Detective Bureau by the end of that morning, the final line was typed in all caps: missing person under suspicious circumstances. The next day, the search expanded with county deputies, volunteer search and rescue, and locals who knew the Fullers. A map was spread across the hood of a patrol car, divided into grids, marking every route Megan might have taken. Morning temperature barely above 50, thick fog limiting visibility, but everyone pressed on. They started at the abandoned warehouses half a mile from Carter Automotive and worked toward the old railroad tracks that ran parallel to a small creek. Searchers walked in lines, moving slowly, poking the grass with sticks, shining flashlights into every ditch and clump of bushes. The steady crunch of boots on wet ground was broken only by calls of Megan's name echoing in the cold, misty air. Around 10 o'clock, a middle-aged volunteer who lived in the neighboring subdivision bent down beside the north fence of the warehouse and picked up a small gray object caked in dirt. It was a soaked wool glove, frayed and streaked with red mud. When she brought it to the officer in charge, Mr. Fuller recognized it immediately. The exact kind Megan wore to work, bought at the local store. The glove was sealed in a plastic evidence bag, tagged, and the entire area immediately cordoned off. Yellow tape went up, everyone was ordered back, and only the forensics team was allowed in. They measured, photographed, placed stakes to mark the exact spot, and examined the ground on both sides of the fence. On the damp soil mixed with gravel were faint shoe prints pointing toward the warehouse, medium size, deep tread soles typical of mechanics or construction workers. A few meters away were tire tracks overlapping the footprints, apparently from a small truck or pickup. Police marked off everything from the gate to the railroad tracks and set up a temporary tent to protect the scene. Every new find was meticulously documented: wind direction, temperature, the glove's exact position relative to the fence. They found more bent grass suggesting two people may have moved through, one running, one chasing, but it wasn't clear enough to conclude. Inside the warehouse, forensic techs swept UV lights, dusted for prints, checked scratches on the metal walls and concrete floor. The air was thick with old grease and rust, dead silent. One tech found a small torn scrap of fabric caught on a fence latch, same material as the glove. A quick report went to the temporary command post. The officer in charge ordered the search radius extended another 200 meters south, along the tracks, and requested records of every vehicle that had been in the area in the past 2 days. By noon, the searchers had spread out, silently watching the yellow tape flutter in the breeze. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. This was no longer a simple missing person case. One officer wrote at the bottom of the temporary log in bold, clear letters, "Suspicion of abduction or forced movement cannot be ruled out." That same afternoon, once the warehouse area was fully secured, the Indiana State Police CSI Division arrived. 3 specialized vans parked along the dirt road. Forensic techs in white Tyvek suits stepped out carrying cameras, evidence kits, and measuring tools. They moved carefully along the fence where the glove was found, marking positions with small orange flags and measuring tape. Pale sunlight filtered through thick clouds onto the patchy red mud and flattened grass. The smell of rust and motor oil hung in the air. One tech began taking overview photos, numbering every angle, while another used a tape measure to record distances between the glove, tire tracks, and warehouse gate. Each shoe print was lightly dusted with white powder for contrast, then photographed close-up with a scale ruler beside it. The tread was deep, round-edged, with a faint logo in the center. WorkSafe brand, common in Madison County auto shops. Near the warehouse gate, a patch of hardened clay showed a fan-shaped oil stain darker than the surrounding soil. A tech swabbed it, sealed the sample in a vial labeled Oil Sample #17, and noted time, location, temperature. Inside, under the metal doorframe, they found a few dark fibers snagged on a rusty bolt, torn at the edge, possibly from clothing friction. Those were lifted with tweezers, placed in separate evidence envelopes, and sealed. UV lights revealed a few faint glows on the walls. The CSI supervisor ordered soil samples from 2 spots that looked like drag marks. A cracked section of concrete had fresh clay stuck to the edge, evidence something heavy had recently been pulled across it. Along the tracks, gravel was disturbed in one stretch. Among the older stones were newer, narrower tire tracks, possibly from a compact pickup. The whole scene was recorded by drone for later 3D modeling. When collection was complete, evidence was boxed and numbered: soil, oil, fibers, cast shoe prints, and the glove. Everything was sealed with evidence tape, labeled Case MF 2005, and transported the same day to the Indiana State Police Lab in Indianapolis. The temporary report detailed every step: collection sequence, times, personnel, preservation methods, condition of items. At the scene, the CSI team's preliminary conclusion: no visible blood or biological evidence, but the mechanical signs, footprints, tire tracks, oil indicated a vehicle, and at least one person had been on the wet ground. The night Megan disappeared. One tech wrote in his field notes: shoe print pattern consistent with WorkSafe mechanic series, size range 9-10. Under additional observation, he added in black ink: oil compound exhibits polymeric additives, common in industrial lubricant, potentially automotive origin. The preliminary forensic report was emailed to Madison County before the team left the scene at 1825. On the last page, the temporary finding was italicized and stamped, inconclusive but significant correlation. 3 days after CSI finished collecting samples, Megan Fuller's missing person file was transferred from patrol to the Madison County Criminal Investigation Division. Detective Carl Benson, with more than 10 years handling missing persons and minor violent crimes, was assigned lead. He received the file Thursday morning in his small second-floor office, walls covered with topo maps, a whiteboard crammed with names, times, and locations. On his desk, thick folders of scene reports, evidence photos, shoe print casts, and the family's initial statements. The line "suspicion of abduction cannot be ruled out" stood out. Benson started by listing everyone at the September 17th party at Carter Automotive. 9 people total, 6 employees, 2 close friends of the owner, 1 neighbor. He scheduled all 9 for individual interviews at headquarters over the next 2 days. His goal: pin down the exact last moment Megan was seen and who was closest to her that night. The first interviews were with 3 younger employees. All described a normal party: a few beers, old radio music, nobody drunk, no arguments. Megan left a little after 11, one said, but no one remembered the exact minute. When asked who spoke to her last, every one of them named Dylan Carter, the 27-year-old shop owner, and Ethan Marsh, a co-worker on the evening shift. Benson had both men come in the next day. Dylan Carter arrived first, tall, short hair, gray work shirt with the shop logo. Benson started with simple questions about when Megan left. Dylan said around 11:30. She seemed in a hurry, but nothing unusual. They chatted briefly about work, then she walked off toward the railroad tracks. When asked about their relationship, Dylan admitted they had dated briefly the year before, but broke up amicably. Throughout the interview, he stayed calm, answered clearly, never dodged a question. Benson noted, cooperative, no visible anxiety, but put a small mark next to the 11:30 timeline. Uncertain. That afternoon, Ethan Marsh came in. In contrast to Dylan, Ethan was fidgety, eyes constantly flicking to the door. He said Megan left before midnight, around 11:15, carrying a small purse and saying she'd take the shortcut past the old warehouses. When asked if he walked with her, Ethan said no. He stayed to clean up with Dylan. But Dylan had said he locked up the shop alone after Megan left. That small discrepancy made Benson pause and raise an eyebrow. He had both men describe again the last moment they saw Megan. Their stories didn't match. Dylan said she walked south. Ethan insisted she turned right north, opposite directions. When Benson asked about lighting around the shop area, both answers were vague. He wrote in bold, discrepancy on directions time, revisit. While waiting for lab results from Indianapolis, he re-examined every scene report and map. The glove was found about 800 meters from the shop gate. If Dylan was right, Megan would have passed that spot within 5 minutes of leaving the party. He drew a red line from the shop to the warehouse to the glove location, forming a closed loop. Comparing weather records and ground conditions that night, he added that light rain could have blurred traces within hours. At the end of the day, Benson called Megan's parents with a brief update. He was reviewing statements and couldn't yet say anything definitive. In his first official report to superiors, he concluded, witness statements collected. Subject seen last between 11:15, 11:30 p.m. by Carter, D. and Marsh. Minor inconsistencies noted in timeline and route description. Those short lines marked the start of the formal investigation and the moment suspicion began to settle around the last two people known to have seen Megan Fuller. 2 days after completing the initial interviews, Detective Carl Benson returned to the abandoned warehouse with the crime scene team for a follow-up sweep. He wanted to verify the timelines and movement directions described by the witnesses while expanding the search within a half-mile radius around the rail line. It was a cold, dry September morning. The fog lifted slowly and pale sunlight filtered through the rusted window frames. The area was still sealed off, yellow tape stretched along the fence, old forensic tech footprints still visible in the dirt. This time, the police brought metal detectors, UV lights and ground-penetrating radar to check for anything buried beneath the surface. One technician slowly moved a detection antenna in parallel lines along the west wall of the warehouse, where the ground was slightly higher. The screen showed small interference streaks, but nothing clear enough to identify as metal or debris. Another team swept the floor and fence area with UV light. The blue glow revealed patchy stains, all confirmed as industrial oil or grease, not biological traces. They continued outward toward the rail line, where the ground turned to gravel and sand. About 60 meters from the warehouse, the radar picked up a weak, oval-shaped reflection, roughly 40 centimeters underground. Police dug test holes with small shovels, but found only compacted soil and gravel, mixed with a few scraps of iron. Nothing related to a large object or human body. However, right near that spot, a technician noticed a 2-meter-long oil streak on the ground, darker and thicker than the older stains. The oil still had a strong smell, indicating it hadn't fully washed away and was likely deposited within the past few days. A sample was collected with a swab and sealed in a vial. On the ground nearby were tire tracks fresher than the previous records, deep grooves, narrow wheelbase, consistent with a light-duty pickup truck. Benson crouched to examine them, made notes in his notebook, then ordered precise photographs and measurements of the location. If this truck showed up after the night she went missing, it could belong to a worker, but if it was before, we're looking at the suspect's route, he said quietly, to a colleague. The surrounding area was thoroughly scanned with handheld metal detectors, turning up only a few rusty screws and old beer cans, no personal items or weapons. Along the north fence, UV light revealed small spray-like glowing marks, but quick field tests came back negative for blood. A section of ground near the gate showed signs of light leveling, as if something heavy had passed over. But light rain and wind made it impossible to date. Benson wrote in his notebook, "No human remains detected, possible vehicle involvement." He ordered the tech team to preserve the scene and redraw a detailed site map, numbering every discovery point. By late afternoon, all radar data, UV images and tire track photos were backed up to a hard drive and sent to the Central Investigation Lab. As the team pulled out, the sun had already dropped behind the trees, and the last light of day stretched across the dark oil stains on the ground, the only remaining sign that a vehicle had once stopped here on the night Megan Fuller disappeared. After completing the warehouse area sweep and documenting possible vehicle-related evidence, Detective Carl Benson shifted the investigation to the last two people known to have seen Megan Fuller, Dylan Carter and Ethan Marsh. He submitted emergency search warrant applications to the Madison County Court for both men's homes, vehicles, and personal property, citing them as key witnesses in a suspicious disappearance. The warrants were approved on the afternoon of September 24th. The next morning, a team of officers and forensic technicians executed the search at Dylan Carter's suburban house, located about 4 miles from Carter Automotive. It was a small property with a gravel front yard and a green pickup parked under the carport. Dylan was home and remained cooperative but cold. While Benson spoke with him in the living room, two technicians collected soil samples from the walkway, examined footwear and clothing, and processed the garage. In the shoe cabinet, they found a pair of black WorkSafe boots with thick soles and dried red clay stuck in the treads. A visual comparison showed the soil matched the distinctive red clay from the warehouse lot where Megan's glove was recovered. The boots were sealed, labeled EXH04C, and photographed in detail. In the garage, industrial oil cans and old auto parts were stacked in rows. A technician took an oil sample from an open container for comparison with the scene samples and checked the outdoor trash. No personal items belonging to Megan or signs of hasty cleaning were found. Benson asked Dylan about the night of September 17th. He repeated his original statement, "Megan left alone, no argument." He locked up the shop and went home. When asked if he used the pickup that night, Dylan said no, claiming the truck had electrical issues but offering no repair receipts. The truck's interior was checked, the floor was dry, no unusual stains, but there was a stronger than normal oil smell behind the driver's seat. Air samples were collected for compound analysis. After 3 hours, the team left with the boots, oil samples, and garage dirt. That same afternoon, another team arrived at Ethan Marsh's ground floor apartment in the West Side worker housing. Ethan appeared nervous, hands shaking as he signed the consent form. Inside, there was nothing noteworthy beyond work clothes and a few toolboxes. However, when they examined his gray sedan, technicians detected an oil smell in the trunk and several small dark stains on the carpet liner. Samples were swabbed and sealed separately. Also found was a dark blue fabric fiber caught in the rear seat crease, completely different from the car's gray interior. Police asked if he had given anyone a ride that week. Ethan said, "Just coworkers," but didn't name them. The entire vehicle was photographed, tire soil collected, and noted as potential transfer evidence. Back at the temporary lab at the sheriff's office, Benson prioritized comparison testing of the soil, oil, and fiber samples. 3 days later, preliminary forensic results came in. The soil on Dylan's boots had similar mineral composition to the scene sample, but differing moisture and iron levels, no conclusive match. The oil smell in Ethan's car contained polymers closely resembling Carter Automotive's industrial oil, though additive concentrations were lower. The blue fiber contained no human DNA or blood traces. The report concluded, "No human biological material detected. Similarities noted but inconclusive." Benson read the report, drew a red line under inconclusive, and closed the folder. Though the results weren't enough to charge anyone, he knew the small details, red clay, oil smell, off-color fiber, were still important pieces to hold on to. 2 days after receiving the preliminary forensic results, Detective Carl Benson called Dylan Carter and Ethan Marsh in for separate formal interviews. He wanted to re-examine every detail of their original statements, especially timelines and departure routes, since minor inconsistencies in the earlier transcripts remained unresolved. Dylan arrived first, on time, neatly dressed, and calm. In the small interview room under harsh white lights, Benson spoke slowly and evenly while reviewing Dylan's account of September 17th. Dylan repeated, almost exactly what he'd said before. The party ended around 11:30. Megan left alone saying she'd take the shortcut, and he locked up 10 minutes later. Benson asked again about the pickup. Dylan insisted it stayed in the garage all night. When asked if anyone else stayed behind at the shop, he said no. Everyone had already left. Throughout the hour-and-a-half interview, Dylan showed no visible nerves, steady voice, steady eyes. Benson changed question order and brought up details about lighting in the shop area and the direction she walked. But Dylan remained consistent. She headed toward the rail line. There was only one brief moment when Benson asked, "Are you sure you actually saw her leave the property?" Dylan paused several seconds before answering, "I think so. I couldn't see clearly because the shop lights were already off." Benson jotted pause before answer, observation only. After wrapping up, he moved to Ethan Marsh. Ethan arrived almost 20 minutes late, looking exhausted, hands in his jacket pockets. When he sat down, he avoided eye contact. Benson began by reading Ethan's prior statement. He said Megan left around 11:15. He stayed to clean up with Dylan until nearly midnight, then drove home. When asked again, Ethan grew flustered, saying maybe a little later, around 11:30 or so, then changed the subject to the party music. Benson made notes and pressed on the route home. "You said you took the main road straight to the worker housing, right?" Ethan nodded, but when asked if he passed the old warehouse, he hesitated and said, "I think I turned right near there, but I don't really remember." Benson stopped writing and looked directly at him. "You previously said that road was impassable at night. Why turn there?" Ethan went quiet for a few seconds, then muttered, "I guess I remembered wrong." When asked what time he actually left the shop, Ethan gave a new time, probably just before midnight, completely contradicting both his earlier statement and Dylan's. His nervousness increased. He kept rubbing his hands and glancing at the clock. Benson observed without interrupting, only occasionally repeating the conflicting details, times, directions, where the car was parked. When asked if he saw Megan talking to anyone else before leaving, Ethan shook his head and said, "No, just her." He was released after 2 hours. Benson noted, subject anxious, timeline inconsistent, route unclear. That evening, Benson reviewed the video recordings of both interviews. Dylan appeared calm, never raised his voice, but also showed no emotion. Ethan was clearly unsettled, constantly shifting details about timing and route. He compared them again to the forensic report. No biological evidence, no DNA, no blood, just indirect similarities. After completing the interviews and cross-referencing statements without finding solid evidence, Detective Carl Benson decided to widen the search to rule out the possibility that Megan Fuller was being held or buried nearby. On October 1, 2005, a county-wide search operation was launched, covering a 10-mile radius from the abandoned warehouse, the last location linked to the victim. Topographic maps were spread across tables in a temporary command center set up at the Harrison Township Community Building, divided into sectors assigned to individual teams. Police, volunteer search and rescue, forest rangers, and reservists were mobilized. 2 K-9 units were brought in from Indianapolis. On the first morning, dozens of searchers formed lines and moved slowly through open fields, harvested cornfields, trails, and areas around the old rail line. The dogs sniffed patches of grass and barked at unusual scents, but every alert turned out to be animal remains or trash. Benson directed operations in the field, moving between teams and logging GPS coordinates and sector statuses. During the first week, the weather turned cold and rainy, making searches difficult. Mud-caked tires, and ground-penetrating radar kept giving false signals due to high moisture. Most screen anomalies were just rocks or old metal scraps. Several flagged spots were dug up, revealing only bare soil and rotted wood. Benson patiently had the entire northern hillside, lightly wooded with a small creek, thoroughly checked, but no signs of disturbance were found. State police helicopters flew patterns with infrared cameras, looking for heat anomalies around the warehouse and nearby neighborhoods, all negative. The dive team scanned the creek with sonar, finding only trash and sunken logs. With each passing day, small hopes faded, replaced by the repetitive process. Check, mark, report, eliminate. Benson spent evenings reviewing the search logs, trying to find any connection between the oil streaks, tire tracks, and possible vehicle routes, but the maps showed only broken arrows. He had all available traffic cameras along main roads checked, but in 2005 Madison County had no comprehensive system. There was no footage. Residents near the warehouse were re-interviewed multiple times, but everyone only remembered that night as cold, quiet, nobody around. One man living near the tracks recalled seeing vehicle headlights around midnight, but couldn't identify the type or direction. After 3 weeks, the expanded search moved to Phase 2, low-frequency ground radar survey. Equipment was brought in from Purdue University, but signals remained weak due to clay-heavy soil and rock fragments. The expert report stated, no subsurface anomaly consistent with human remains. By late October, Benson requested 10 more days before reassessment. The K-9 teams rotated back to the scene, this time focusing on the area around Carter Automotive and the road connecting to the warehouse. One dog reacted strongly near the creek bank by a pile of old lumber, prompting a pause to dig. When the wood was removed, they found only tires and trash underneath. Every lid ended in a dead end. By mid-November, the search had covered more than 300 square miles and cost tens of thousands of dollars in manpower and equipment. Lab results from Indianapolis remained unchanged. Footprints, oil, and fiber showed only similarities, not conclusive matches. Neither Ethan nor Dylan was charged, and no new evidence surfaced against them. Public interest in the town began to fade. People returned to daily life. The yellow tape around the warehouse came down, leaving only churned-up dirt and stray stakes. In his office, Benson stared at the wall covered in arrows and symbols, then crossed out current activity on the case file. He never officially declared the investigation closed, but everyone understood it had reached its limit. By the end of 2006, after more than a year without any new leads, Megan Fuller's disappearance was officially reclassified as a cold case. The decision was signed on December 27 by the Madison County Sheriff's Criminal Investigations Division Chief, marking the suspension of all active search efforts. In an administrative document, less than 3 pages long, the entire search and investigation was summarized, 14 scene reports, 62 forensic samples examined, 19 witness interviews, and 0 confirmed sightings of the victim. Copies of the report were sent to the Indiana State Prosecutor's Office, which agreed the file would only be reopened if new physical evidence or a credible witness emerged. The remaining evidence, work-safe boots, soil samples, fabric fibers, wool gloves, and vials of industrial oil, was sealed one final time under case number MF 2005, case 22, and transferred to the Indiana State Evidence Repository in Indianapolis. Each box was labeled on the outside with a warning, "Do not discard. Active status pending future review." All items were stored at a constant 20 degrees Celsius and 40% humidity on shelf 47B. Crime scene photographs were backed up to 3 optical discs, one kept at the Madison County Sheriff's Office, one sent to the state office, and one archived in the digital evidence vault. In early 2007, when investigative budgets were cut, many other unsolved cases were closed at the same time. Detective Carl Benson, who had worked the case for more than 15 months, submitted his early retirement paperwork in February. In his small office, he packed up old files, set Megan's aside in a gray hardback binder, and wrote in black marker on the spine, "Fuller." unresolved. When he turned the file over to administration, he paused longer than usual before signing the last page under Investigator of Record. His signature was scanned into the system as a formality, but for many in the department, it closed the book on whatever effort remained. The basement evidence room beneath headquarters was quiet, lit only by the hum of air conditioning and pale fluorescent lights reflecting off tall steel shelves. Among hundreds of other boxes, evidence container MF 2005, Case 22, sat on the middle tier, row 4E, slowly collecting a thin layer of dust. Every quarter, the custodian still performed inventory, checked the seals, and wrote intact. No request for review. In the state's electronic case management system, the final status line read, "Case closed for active investigation, classified as cold case pending new lead." From that moment on, Megan Fuller's name was officially added to Indiana's list of unresolved missing persons. Entry number 173, out of more than 200 cases, still without answers. In April 2012, nearly 7 years after Megan Fuller's case was shelved as a cold case, the abandoned warehouse along the Harrison rail line, the site that had once been sealed off and was the focal point of the 2005 search, was scheduled for demolition to make way for a new city materials yard. On the morning of April 18th, while clearing the old foundation, workers discovered a small metal object glinting beneath dried clay near the north fence. A young worker bent down, thinking it was scrap wire, but when he brushed off the dirt, he realized it was a silver bracelet with 2 faintly engraved initials still legible on the outer face. In the sunlight, slanting through the remaining corrugated sheets, the item gave off a weak reflection, prompting the site foreman to halt work and call local police. Less than an hour later, 2 Madison County deputies arrived, secured a small perimeter around the find, measured the location, and photographed the scene. The bracelet was collected with latex gloves, placed in a sterile nylon bag, and temporarily labeled Recovered Item #12, Silver Bracelet. A short evidence log noted its condition: outer surface scratched, engraved MF, diameter 5.7 centimeters, no obvious adhered material. Word spread quickly through town, instantly reviving memories of the long-forgotten disappearance. One of the responding deputies, who had been part of the original 2005 search team, recognized the initials as matching Megan Fuller and recommended the item be sent to the Indiana State Forensic Laboratory in Indianapolis for DNA and fingerprint analysis. It was transported the same day along with a copy of the old case file, MF 2005, Case 22, pulled from storage. Technicians examined the bracelet's surface under a scanning electron microscope and lifted any remaining epithelial cells with specialized adhesive tape before attempting DNA extraction. The preliminary report noted that the sample was too small and heavily degraded to yield a specific individual profile. No fingerprints were recoverable due to surface wear and prolonged environmental exposure. For comparison, the lab ran the partial profile against DNA retained from Linda Fuller, Megan's mother, taken in 2005, but the match probability was only 62%, below the state forensic threshold for identification. On April 26, the final results were returned to Madison County with the conclusion: DNA sample degraded, inconclusive. Further testing not recommended. Even so, retired Detective Benson received a courtesy copy of the report via internal email from an old colleague. He read the conclusion, nodded silently, and accepted that the thin lead was still not enough to change the case status. At the sheriff's office, the duty inspector compiled the paperwork and forwarded it to the county prosecutor. A short addendum was attached to file MF 2005, Case 22, Recovered New Item, Silver Bracelet with engraving. No verified biological evidence. Case remains inactive. By late May, the bracelet was returned to the state evidence repository, placed back in the original sealed container, with a new label layered over the old. The archivist updated the system note: item added for record keeping. Case remains cold. The steel vault door closed, the hallway lights timed out, and in the silence lay one small tarnished piece of jewelry. The only thing recovered in nearly 7 years since Megan Fuller vanished, yet still not enough to reopen her dust-covered file. In January 2022, almost 2 decades after Megan Fuller went missing, the Indiana State Police officially established a dedicated cold case division, a federally funded program tasked with re-examining long-dormant unsolved cases using modern forensic technology. The unit's goal was to retest old evidence that had previously stalled due to insufficient proof or outdated analytical methods. Lieutenant Kate Morrison, a 15-year veteran in criminology and degraded DNA identification, was appointed lead investigator for the central region of the state. She set up in a new office inside the Indianapolis headquarters, surrounded by hundreds of steel shelves packed with case boxes, more than half marked inactive, meaning no investigative activity in the past 10 years. By mid-February, Morrison and 2 assistants began screening files, sorting by date, priority, and condition of remaining evidence. While reviewing cases from 2010, she flagged Fuller Megan L. missing person, 2005, with the note complete evidence set preserved, inactive, since 2006. The fact that the full evidence set was still intact was rare. Most long-term missing persons cases had lost or damaged items through multiple warehouse moves. Morrison pulled the box, removed the thick folder containing original scene reports, photographs, lab results, and Detective Carl Benson's signed summaries. She read it straight through, lingering over descriptions of the WorkSafe boot prints, oil stains, and the silver MF bracelet recovered in 2012. Every item was logged as being in intact condition and stored in the state's climate-controlled repository. She wrote in red pen in the margin, "Review for reanalysis, eligible for advanced testing." At an internal team meeting on February 18, she briefly explained why she selected the case: clear timeline of disappearance, limited scene area, intact evidence, and realistic chance of extracting viable DNA traces with current technology. Her colleagues agreed, and MF 2005, Case 22 was officially placed on the Q1 2022 reinvestigation priority list. After nearly 2 weeks of paperwork and verification that the evidence was still properly preserved, Morrison took the first concrete step. She requested the entire evidence set be pulled from storage for modern retesting. In early March 2022, she signed the transfer order, moving all Megan Fuller evidence to the Indiana State Central Laboratory for re-examination using next-generation forensic methods. The items handed over were 1 gray wool glove, 1 pair of WorkSafe boots, a dry soil sample, 2 vials of oil residue, 1 synthetic fabric fiber, and the silver MF bracelet, all still bearing original 2006 seals, except the bracelet, which had an additional 2012 reopening label. Testing lasted nearly 3 weeks under the supervision of forensic team leader Dr. Robert Lane. In the first phase, technicians used Raman spectroscopy for surface analysis and an improved enzymatic extraction method for degraded DNA. On March 14, the lab reported its initial breakthrough. Biological traces on the inner surface of the silver bracelet showed a Y chromosome profile, male DNA. The sample was sent to the State DNA Identification Center for comparison against CODIS and the 2005 archive profiles. Within 48 hours, the system returned a perfect match to Dylan Carter, Megan's ex-boyfriend and owner of Carter Automotive, where she had worked before disappearing. It was the first solid break since the case was reopened. Morrison immediately ordered cross-checking with the other items. Meanwhile, materials analysts examined paint particles and dust inside the wool glove. Results revealed electrostatic gray-silver powder coating flakes with a chemical composition matching 98% of the frame paint used in Carter Automotive's body shop line between 2005 and 2006, according to original business records, seized in 2005. The report stated, powder coating particles consistent with Carter Automotive production line, probability of coincidental match 1 in 2500. The oil in the glass vials, previously dismissed as generic industrial lubricant, was retested via GCMS spectrometry. It contained proprietary additive code CB05N, matching the commercial product Carter B05 lubricant supplied exclusively to Carter Automotive. When Morrison cross-referenced old invoices Benson had kept, she found an entry dated September 12, 2005, just 3 days before Megan vanished, listing the exact same product code. All findings were compiled into a 70-plus page report divided into biological, chemical, and materials sections, each concluding that the crime scene evidence originated from Carter Automotive. Dr. Lane's final summary, signed March 24, read, "Physical evidence consistent with Carter Automotive origin. DNA sample confirms male profile matching Dylan Carter with statistical certainty." Morrison read every page, closed the folder, and felt a chill down her spine. Evidence that in 2005 had been labeled inconclusive now formed a clear chain linking the scene to one specific individual. Still following protocol, she requested independent confirmation from the Regional Federal Lab in Chicago. By early April, results came back identical. DNA on the bracelet belonged to Dylan Carter with no possibility of error, and the remaining items were confirmed to have come from Carter Automotive's production area. Morrison wrote in her investigation log, "Evidence coherence achieved after 17 years. Correlation no longer circumstantial." Under the lab's cold white lights, she looked at the small silver bracelet sealed in its evidence box. The item that had meant nothing for a decade. Now the key to unlocking a case everyone thought was lost forever. Immediately after receiving the confirmed forensic conclusions, linking the bracelet DNA to Dylan Carter and the other items to Carter Automotive, Lieutenant Kate Morrison moved to the next phase, re-interviewing every witness connected to Megan Fuller's 2005 disappearance. She started with Detective Benson's original list of 12 individuals, most of whom still lived in Madison County. On April 5, 2022, Morrison and Assistant Investigator Paul Richards visited the first witness, Amanda Price, Megan's former co-worker, now managing an auto parts store in Anderson. Amanda clearly remembered the night of the shop party. Megan left alone, but earlier she had argued heatedly with Dylan in the office area. When Morrison pressed for details, Amanda stated firmly that Dylan wasn't himself that night, and that she once overheard him tell another employee that if he couldn't have her back, he'd make her regret it. Morrison had Amanda provide a new sworn statement and collected 2 additional affidavits from others who had been at the party. One confirming they saw Megan talking to Dylan in the parking lot before she left. Another saying Ethan Marsh, Dylan's employee, drove away from the shop just minutes later. On April 8, Morrison issued formal summons for Dylan Carter and Ethan Marsh to appear at State Police Headquarters in Indianapolis for supplemental statements. Dylan arrived on time, dressed in a dark shirt, calm but evasive when asked about his post-breakup contact with Megan. He insisted he never saw her again after the party and claimed no knowledge of the bracelet. When Morrison laid out the forensic results, his expression flickered, but he quickly offered that the bracelet could have fallen off in the shop and someone picked it up without realizing. Morrison noted clear signs of stress, constant hand-rubbing and avoidance of eye contact. After more than 2 hours, the interview ended without new admissions, but she wrote in the report, "Subject demonstrates avoidance and defensive behavior." 2 days later, Ethan Marsh appeared late and without counsel, yet refused to answer almost every substantive question about the night Megan vanished, responding only to basic information. When asked if he saw Dylan leave after Megan, he hesitated and said, "Everyone left around the same time. I don't really remember." When reminded of the work-safe boot prints and oil-matching shop products, he went silent and asked to end the interview. Morrison allowed him to leave, but noted subject refuses to answer material questions. Follow-up required. At the April 12 case team meeting, Morrison presented the full updated picture lab results, Amanda Price's statement, and 2 corroborating affidavits confirming conflict between Dylan and Megan before her disappearance. Her internal report concluded, primary persons of interest, Dylan Carter and Ethan Marsh, connection substantiated by physical evidence and witness statements. After the meeting, she asked the state legal division to prepare supplemental search warrants for Dylan Carter's current home and business, and she placed Ethan Marsh under temporary location monitoring to prevent him from leaving Indiana. That evening, alone in her office, she reopened Benson's old handwritten notes. One marginal line read, "Something between Dylan and Ethan feels unspoken. Circle back if case reopens." 17 years later, that note became the roadmap for the new investigation. Morrison closed the file. Fluorescent light fell across the whiteboard that now carried only two names in red marker: Dylan Carter and Ethan Marsh. Beneath the heading Active Suspects, MF 2005, she added a small exclamation point. Simple but definitive, Megan Fuller's disappearance was no longer just an old story. It was back in the hands of people determined to see it through to the truth. After completing the re-interview sessions and identifying the two primary suspects, Lieutenant Kate Morrison focused on strengthening the chain of physical evidence to ensure every piece could hold up in court. She ordered the investigative team to review all technical records and supply contracts from businesses in the Madison County area in 2005 in order to verify the uniqueness of the materials that had appeared in the forensic results. After more than a week, working with the Department of Commerce and the State Environmental Agency, the results showed that Carter Automotive was the only company within a 20-mile radius that had ever used both products that exactly matched the samples, PBX 12 powder coating paint and Carter B05 industrial oil. No other shop had registered or imported paint with that specific polymer structure and additives in the same year. Morrison highlighted the conclusion line in the technical report, considering it the key link between the crime scene and the workplace of both suspects. Meanwhile, new information from the Waste Management Division pushed the investigation forward another step. An employee at Benton Salvage reported that they had just taken in a 2003 Ford Ranger registered to Ethan Marsh, which had been abandoned there nearly 6 months before the yard was inspected. Morrison immediately obtained a search warrant and sent the crime scene unit to examine the vehicle. Inside the truck bed, thick dried dirt stuck in the undercarriage crevices and floor mats was collected for analysis. The geological report dated May 4th concluded that the mineral composition, iron oxide ratio, and organic traces in the dirt taken from the truck matched 99.3% with the soil samples collected from the Harrison Rail Line crime scene in 2005. In addition, trace amounts of industrial oil with the same spectral characteristics as Carter B05 were detected. Although the truck had been partially stripped, technicians still recovered silver paint fibers on the rear seat upholstery that matched the previously identified powder coating. Morrison noted in the file, evidential convergence between suspect vehicle and crime scene confirmed. But physical evidence alone was not enough. She wanted to bolster the location data to confirm Dylan and Ethan's presence at the warehouse area on the night Megan disappeared. With assistance from the state data specialist, Morrison requested the recovery of archived 2005 Verizon cell phone signal records. Though the data had been compressed and encrypted, a portion of the call logs remained recoverable thanks to the FBI's newly deployed digital tracing program. The restored record showed that on the evening of September 15, 2005, at 23:08, the exact time Megan was determined to have lost contact. Dylan Carter's phone connected to the cell tower, located on County Road 600W, less than 600 meters from the Harrison warehouse complex. At the same time, Ethan Marsh's mobile device also appeared in the same coverage area between 23:05 and 23:27, then dropped signal while moving south. When this data was overlaid on the tower location map, the two devices followed nearly identical travel paths, suggesting they were either in the same area or in the same vehicle. Morrison presented the results to the state prosecutor's office, along with a comprehensive comparison of all physical evidence, witness statements, and signal data. Together they formed a closed logical chain: Dylan's DNA on Megan's bracelet, materials and oil tracing back to Carter Automotive, soil in Ethan's truck, matching the crime scene, and cell tower data, proving both men were at the warehouse location on the night the victim vanished. In her consolidated report dated May 9, Morrison wrote, "Evidence establishes consistent nexus between both suspects and the crime location. Probable cause established for arrest warrants." She forwarded the entire file to the Madison County Prosecutor's Office for approval of arrest warrants. As she signed the last page, Morrison paused for a few seconds, staring at the case heading Case MF 2005, Fuller, Request for Arrest Authorization. After 17 years, the scattered pieces of evidence had finally locked together into a unified structure, strong enough to pull the case out of the shadows of cold case status and into formal prosecution. In November 2022, after nearly 6 months finalizing the file and re-examining all evidence, the Madison County Court officially approved 2 arrest warrants numbered 22 MC 741 and 22 MC 742 for Dylan Carter, age 41, and Ethan Marsh, age 39, on charges of kidnapping and actions leading to serious disappearance in the 2005 Megan Fuller case. The warrants were signed by Judge Lawrence P. Dwyer on the morning of November 3, after the prosecutor's office submitted a 184-page summary containing all forensic results, cell phone location data, and new witness statements. That same day, Lieutenant Kate Morrison received the official documents at Indiana State Police Headquarters in Indianapolis. That afternoon, she assembled the task force and coordinated with local police to execute simultaneous arrests at 2 locations. At 5:45 p.m., a team of 4 officers approached a suburban home in Elwood, where Dylan lived with his wife and children and ran a small garage. He was taken into custody in the backyard right after closing the shop. According to the scene report, Dylan appeared surprised but offered no resistance, only asking briefly, "This is about 2005, isn't it?" before falling silent when read his Miranda rights. At the same moment, 30 miles away, a second team approached a rental apartment in Anderson, where Ethan Marsh worked as an auto technician for a local dealership. He was arrested in front of his landlord and 2 co-workers, showing no violence but clear confusion upon learning Dylan had also been taken into custody. Both men were transported separately to Indiana State Police Headquarters in Indianapolis in different patrol cars, accompanied by forensic personnel to document the arrest conditions. At 8:15 p.m., Morrison received the transfer paperwork and personally signed off on the suspect's condition. The 2 were placed in separate holding cells, fingerprinted, photographed, and swabbed for DNA comparison, all results confirming matches with existing case records. At a brief press conference the following day, the Indiana State Police spokesperson announced to the media that the disappearance of Megan Fuller, after 17 years, had been officially reopened and the first 2 suspects were in custody. The news spread instantly across Madison County, replayed continuously by local stations throughout the weekend under headlines such as Indiana 2005 cold case reopened, 2 arrested. Local public opinion, long accustomed to the case fading into oblivion, suddenly erupted. Outside police headquarters, residents gathered, bringing flowers and photos of Megan placed beside a sign reading, "Justice for Megan." Morrison watched the broadcast from her office, the glow of the screen reflecting off the thick case file on her desk, where the heading Case MF 2005 Fuller now carried a new label. Active case, suspects in custody. In her report to the state, she wrote simply, "Arrests executed without resistance. Case reopened after 17 years, now officially active." The once forgotten investigation had returned to the public eye, no longer a dusty file in storage, but the focal point of the entire Indiana State Police. After completing booking procedures, Lieutenant Kate Morrison and the investigative team began the formal interrogation phase, which continued non-stop for 3 days. Dylan Carter was brought into the interview room first, on the morning of November 5, 2022. For more than 4 hours he remained calm, answering briefly and repeatedly, denying any involvement in Megan Fuller's disappearance. When Morrison presented the DNA results, cell phone data, and matching physical evidence from his shop, Dylan only said everything was misunderstood and that the bracelet could have been left at work, where dozens of people came and went every day. He insisted he never saw Megan after the 2005 party and had no idea why his phone signal appeared near the warehouse. Morrison noticed his emotional control begin to waver when she mentioned that Ethan Marsh's truck also contained soil matching the crime scene. He frowned, gave an awkward smile, then fell silent. The interview ended without confession or new details, but Morrison noted in the record, subject exhibits avoidance, defensive posture, signs of psychological strain under confrontation. By contrast, Ethan Marsh appeared nervous from the start when brought in that afternoon. He requested an attorney, but after being told this was only a preliminary interview, he agreed to answer basic questions. For the first nearly 2 hours, Ethan firmly maintained he had no involvement and only followed Dylan's orders at work. However, when Morrison placed photos of the Ford Ranger recovered from the salvage yard, along with the soil and industrial oil results matching the crime scene in front of him, his expression changed. She let the silence stretch, saying only, "We know you were there, Ethan. We just want to hear the truth." After nearly 7 continuous hours of questioning, at 22:47, Ethan asked for a glass of water, lowered his head, and said in a trembling voice, "I don't want to lie anymore. It wasn't planned." He confessed that on the night in question, after the party ended, Dylan texted him to stay behind, help lock up the shop, then go check the old warehouse where Megan usually took a shortcut home. Dylan said he wanted to talk to her one last time. When Megan appeared, the two argued loudly. Ethan stood several meters away, unable to hear exactly what was said, only seeing Megan push Dylan's hand away and turn to leave. Dylan lost control, shoved her hard, and she fell backward toward the iron fence. According to Ethan, her head struck a metal bar, and she collapsed motionless. He described in a low, shaking voice, "There was no scream. She just lay still." Dylan panicked, checked her pulse, then said she's dead. After a few minutes of silence, he told Ethan to help carry the body inside the warehouse, saying, "We'll handle it so no one ever finds her." Ethan said. Dylan fetched tarps and burlap bags, and a few days later returned with him to mix and pour concrete over the warehouse floor, directly over the spot where an old fuel drum had once stood. "I didn't dare say anything. I just did what he told me. I thought he would call the police, but he just said it's over." When Morrison asked why he stayed silent for 17 years, Ethan replied that Dylan threatened that if he ever spoke, he would drag both of us straight to hell. The statement was fully audio and video recorded in the presence of counsel and an assistant prosecutor. Morrison had him sign the transcript, and Ethan signed without hesitation. Immediately afterward, she notified the Indiana State Police forensics team to prepare a survey of the Harrison warehouse area Ethan had identified. The forensic unit was instructed to coordinate with the building authority for permission to excavate the old concrete slab. In the report sent to the county prosecutor in the early hours of November 6, Morrison wrote briefly, "Suspect Marsh confessed involvement post-incident. Statement indicates accidental death and concealment of remains beneath concrete structure at Carter warehouse site. Excavation authorization requested." At the same time, in his separate cell, Dylan continued to say nothing and admit nothing. But for the first time, in Morrison's eyes, he no longer looked calm, only the hollow expression of a man who knew that what had been buried for 17 years was about to be uncovered. On the morning of November 9, 2022, after the Madison County Court approved the excavation warrant, the Indiana State Police forensic team, together with the FBI Midwest Regional Office, began surveying the lot behind the former Carter Automotive Warehouse, the exact location Ethan Marsh had pointed out in his confession. The area was now an empty container parking lot, covered by a roughly 20 centimeters thick concrete slab, showing cracks from years of weathering. At 8:15 a.m., technicians began cutting and removing sections of the slab, documenting every step on video and with measurements to preserve chain of custody. When the first layer of concrete was lifted, ground-penetrating radar, GPR, detected an anomalous object approximately 50 centimeters deep, roughly 1.6 meters long, and inconsistent with the surrounding foundation material. Morrison observed from behind the temporary barricade, noting each timestamp at 10:27 a.m. After the topsoil was carefully scraped away with trowels, a small bone fragment appeared, exhibiting the yellowish-gray color typical of human bone, buried for many years. The forensic team immediately halted, marked the area, and photographed the entire scene. As excavation continued, they uncovered ribs, portions of the pelvis, and notably a clump of long, dark brown hair still matted in the soil, along with a round metal button engraved MC, the style of button used on Carter automotive work jackets. All remains were collected following ancient DNA preservation protocol, placed in sterile bags, and numbered 01 through 14. By late afternoon, at a depth exceeding 70 centimeters, the team located a nearly intact skull with a 6 centimeters linear fracture on the left side and a depressed area near the temple, consistent with blunt force trauma. Morrison signaled the team to pause. No one spoke for several minutes. A cold wind from the old rail line blew past, fluttering the sun tarps overhead. After fully recovering the remains, the site was covered with sealed tarps and temporarily secured pending further testing. All bones and associated evidence were transported directly to the Indiana State Forensic Lab in Indianapolis that night, under Morrison's and the lead technician's direct supervision. There, Dr. Annabelle Cruz, a forensic anthropologist specializing in skeletal identification, oversaw the entire examination. Preliminary analysis confirmed the bones belonged to a female aged approximately 17-20, consistent with Megan Fuller's description at the time of disappearance. The recovered hair still contained roots, allowing mitochondrial DNA extraction. Because nuclear DNA had degraded over the years, the team used next-generation sequencing, NGS, to amplify remaining mitochondrial segments. Comparison with a sample from Linda Fuller, Megan's mother, yielded a 99.98% match, sufficient for legal identification under U.S. Department of Justice standards. Morrison received the official conclusion on November 14. The first line read in bold, mtDNA analysis confirms remains belong to Megan L. Fuller, missing since September 2005. The supplemental forensic report also stated cause of death as severe traumatic brain injury to the left temporal region, consistent with a hard fall or impact with a blunt object. No defensive fractures or post-mortem trauma were observed. The accompanying evidence, buttons, powder-coating particles, fabric fibers, and hair, were all found in the same soil layer, confirming the body was buried immediately after death. On the stainless steel table in the lab, those small objects became undeniable proof that Megan had died, not simply vanished. When Morrison signed the remains receipt form, she paused for a long time, staring at the discovery date line, November 9, 2022. 17 years and 32 days after the young woman left her final party, the truth had finally risen from the cold earth behind the old warehouse, closing the longest missing person search in Madison County history and opening the final chapter of the investigation. On November 20, 2022, just 6 days after the Forensic Examination Office announced the results, confirming the identity of Megan Fuller's remains, the Indiana State Prosecutor's Office officially issued a press release announcing criminal charges against Dylan Carter, 41, on 3 main counts: kidnapping resulting in death, obstruction of justice, and concealment of a body under the Indiana Criminal Code, Sections 3540, 232, and 35-4, 4.1-2-2. The indictment, over 200 pages long, was filed with the Madison County Superior Court, accompanied by the complete chain of legal evidence, including fully matching DNA results, physical evidence recovered from the scene, cell phone location data, and the detailed testimony of Ethan Marsh, a witness and accomplice. In the press release, Chief Prosecutor William Hardy emphasized, Scientific evidence, witness testimony, and digital data have tightly connected every link, confirming that Dylan Carter bears direct responsibility for the death of Megan Fuller and the deliberate concealment of his crime for 17 years. At the same time, Ethan Marsh was transferred from temporary detention to a state witness protection facility after signing an investigation cooperation agreement. Based on the recommendation of Morrison and the investigation team, the prosecutor's office decided to apply mitigating circumstances for Ethan under the cooperating witness provision, allowing exemption from prosecution for serious charges if the suspect's testimony helped identify the primary perpetrator. Ethan provided numerous additional small details that helped complete the legal file, including descriptions of the tools, burlap sacks, and type of concrete Dylan used to bury the body, all of which matched the evidence recovered at the scene. This information was considered a factor in strengthening the criminal timeline, helping to close the investigation file. Morrison, together with the assigned prosecutor, compiled the list of evidence submitted to the court, 27 physical items, including a silver bracelet containing Dylan Carter's DNA, gloves stained with industrial paint, a sample of Carter B05 oil, soil from Ethan's Ford Ranger matching the scene, electrostatic paint fragments from the Carter Automotive production area, and cell phone signal maps matching the location of both suspects at the time Megan lost contact. All were authenticated by 3 independent laboratories: Indianapolis State Lab, Midwest Forensic Center, and Federal DNA Verification Unit, ensuring absolute legality when presented to the jury. In addition to physical evidence, the prosecution submitted the full 6-hour-plus video recording of Ethan Marsh's testimony, in which he recounted in detail the events of the night of September 15, 2005. Forensic psychologists confirmed the testimony was consistent, with no signs of fabrication or coercion. In the file summary, Morrison noted, "Testimony of Marsh aligns with forensic timeline. Sequence of actions corroborated by digital and physical data." For Dylan Carter, the defense attorney hired by the family argued that Megan's death was an accident with no intent to kill, and that the client had simply panicked and lost control. However, the prosecution countered by citing a series of facts proving the intentional nature of the concealment, from illegally pouring concrete and disposing of the body, to threatening witnesses and remaining silent for nearly 2 decades. Morrison's report further pointed out that Dylan continued to operate Carter Automotive for 7 more years after the incident, showing no signs of remorse or cooperation. The Madison County Court accepted the case on November 28 and assigned Judge Dwyer, who had previously signed the arrest warrant, to preside. By regulation, Dylan Carter was held without bail due to the charges carrying a maximum penalty of life imprisonment or the death penalty if intent was proven. Meanwhile, Ethan Marsh remained in protective custody until the trial concluded and became the prosecution's key witness. At the end-of-month internal meeting, Morrison presented the final investigation phase report, marking the completion of the Cold Case Division's task. She wrote briefly in the conclusion, "Case MF, 2005, Fuller fully reconstructed. Legal basis for prosecution solid. Physical, biological, and testimonial evidence cohesive beyond reasonable doubt." On her desk was the old storage card printed with the faded words, "Cold Case 2005, now replaced by a new deep red label, Prosecution Ready, Madison County Court." The case that had been a mystery for nearly 2 decades had now entered the hands of justice, with the entire legal structure built solidly on a foundation of scientific evidence, no longer hypothesis, but truth proven in every detail. On December 12, 2022, the Madison County Superior Court officially opened the public trial in the case of State of Indiana v. Dylan Carter, drawing special attention from local media. The large second-floor courtroom was packed with reporters, the victim's family, and residents of Harrison Township, the community that had been shaken 17 years earlier by Megan Fuller's disappearance. Chief Prosecutor William Hardy, representing the state of Indiana, presented the indictment containing 3 charges: kidnapping resulting in death, obstruction of justice, and concealment of a body. Over the 5-day trial, The 12-member jury heard testimony in turn, examined physical evidence, and watched the video recording of Ethan Marsh's confession. In the opening statement, the prosecution declared, "Science has spoken for the one who could no longer speak. DNA, cell phone data, and the defendant's prolonged silence are irrefutable evidence." Morrison, testifying as the lead investigator, presented the process of reconstructing the file, excavating the scene, and forensic results confirming the cause of death as head trauma. On the screen, images of the silver bracelet engraved MF, work-safe boot prints, and cell phone signal diagrams were projected, each detail recreating that fateful night in 2005. When questioned, Dylan Carter maintained his denial, claiming Megan's death was an unwanted accident and that he panicked and didn't dare call the police. The defense attorney tried to persuade the jury that there was no direct A separate section for technical statistics listed 5 laboratories involved in analysis, 17 total years of investigation. 2 suspects arrested, 1 convicted, and 1 victim identified and laid to rest. In the professional assessment section, Morrison emphasized that the case's success depended not only on technology, but also on persistent evidence preservation. Had Evidence Box, MF, 2005, Ts 22 been destroyed or lost, the entire truth would have remained forever beneath the concrete. She devoted the final section of the report to acknowledging contributions from all parties: the Indiana State Forensic Team, the Madison County Prosecutor's Office, FBI data specialists, and especially predecessor, Detective Benson, who had meticulously documented every scene detail 17 years earlier. Morrison wrote, "His precision outlived time. Without it, none of this would be possible." At 7:30 p.m., she signed the last page, confirming the file status, closed, solved cold case. The handover followed regulations: 1 original kept at state headquarters, 1 electronic copy sent to the National Criminal Archives, and a 20-page summary submitted to the U.S. Department of Justice for the Backlog Case Statistics Program. The next morning, the Indiana State Police Internal Bulletin published the list of 10 cold cases solved in 2022, with the Megan Fuller case placed first, accompanied by the note, "First cold case of Madison County, resolved through integrated forensic sequencing." Local media quickly republished the news, calling it a symbol of the persistence of justice and technological progress. In a short interview, Morrison said, "Technology cannot replace human determination, but when the two meet, the past is no longer untouchable." In the central records room, the archivist attached a new label to the old evidence box, a red sticker reading, "Solved Cold Case. Do not reopen." The samples were permanently sealed and transferred to the state's historical preservation vault for forensic research purposes. The room was quiet, the light reflecting off the neatly stacked files, each box a piece of restored time. Morrison looked at file card #CC 2005-91, the words Megan L. Fuller, clearly visible below, then closed the cover, feeling both relief and emptiness. 17 years, 5 laboratories, 2 suspects, 1 victim, and 1 file finally closed. On the first page of the submitted report, she wrote a short, simple note, carrying the weight of the entire process. "For every unsolved name still waiting in the archive, this is proof that time does not erase truth." The Megan Fuller case thereafter became a model example in Indiana State Police training materials, cited as a classic illustration of the effectiveness of modern forensic technology in resolving cold cases, where every speck of soil, every fiber, and every tiny DNA trace could bring back to life a voice silenced for 17 years. The Megan Fuller case, a disappearance that seemed forgotten for 17 years, is not only a story of restored justice, but also a profound reflection of modern American reality, where faith in the legal system is sometimes tested by time, indifference, and human limitations. Lieutenant Kate Morrison's decision to revive the old file, sparked by just one small piece of evidence, the silver bracelet engraved MF, demonstrates the value of persistence and of seemingly simple professional principles. Never overlook any detail, no matter how minor. In today's American society, where speed and quick results are often prized, this story reminds us that true justice demands endurance, precision, and loyalty to the truth, rather than hasty conclusions. The truth about Megan only came to light thanks to advances in forensic science, from mitochondrial DNA to cell phone geolocation technology, proving that yesterday's limitations can be overcome by today's knowledge and belief. That is a message to law enforcement agencies that investing in science is investing in justice, and that every cold case deserves to be remembered. But more deeply, the story also offers a lesson for every American citizen. No loss completely disappears as long as someone still believes in the value of truth. The way Morrison closed the file with the words, "Time does not erase truth," speaks not only of one case, but serves as a reminder to society as a whole that no matter how long the truth is buried, courage and determination can ultimately bring it back to light. Thank you for following the story of the Megan Fuller case. Proof that justice may be delayed, but it never disappears. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can explore more cold case files together where the truth is still waiting to be found.